So today I'm going to be telling you the correct current UFC top 5 pound for pound rankings. I've seen a lot of people online give their pound for pound rankings. Now it's my turn and this is the correct top 5. So starting off this list in at number 5 is everybody's favourite Merab. Look, I'm sorry you've had to see this guy on your screen, but he is definitely top 5 right now in the UFC. I know a lot of people like to hate the guy. Understandably, his fight style is incredibly boring, but he does deserve to be here with the resume he has. I mean, Merab, I know he's just became champion, but the resume this guy already has, he's honestly one of the greatest bantamweights of all time. But Merab is currently on an 11 fight win streak, and since 2021, just listen to the names of the guys that Merab has beaten. He beat Marlon Moraes, former title contender. He's beaten Jose Aldo, arguably the greatest featherweight of all time, former champion. He's beaten Petr Yan, again a former champion. He's beaten Henry Cejudo, another all-time great, again a former UFC bantamweight champion, and obviously just recently just beat Sean O'Malley, who was the current bantamweight champion. Obviously that's how Merab got the title. Like I said, a lot of people hate him, and I understand his fight style is incredibly boring, but he does have to get his floors here. He is definitely top 5 pound for pound right now, in my opinion. He arguably could have went in at number 4, but I just prefer the person who's in at number 4 over him, so that's why he's there. But Merab is definitely on this list. There is no, you can't really debate it, to be honest. There is no other alternative than this top 5, in my opinion. Next up on the list, we have got current UFC middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis. Now, like I said, him and Merab, it's entirely up to you. There's an argument to be had for Merab to be above DDP, and an argument to be had that DDP should be above Merab. But regardless, both of those guys, in my opinion, deserve to be in the top 5 right now. Like I said, DDP is the current UFC middleweight champion, and the run that this guy's on at the minute is insane. The names that he's put on his resume in such a short space of time with being in the UFC. I mean, let's not forget, he's only had 8 fights in the promotion. He's already became middleweight champion, and some of the names he's got on the resume are insane. He is currently undefeated in the promotion at 8-0. In his 4th UFC matchup, he was in there against Darren Till. Now, I know a lot of people will laugh at that and say Darren Till's shit. I understand he hasn't looked great recently, but let's not forget Darren Till is a former UFC title contender, and he was undefeated for so many years, and he does have a couple good wins on his resume. Let's not pretend that he doesn't. Then after that, he went on to take on Derek Brunson, a guy who was a mainstay in the UFC's top 15 for years. Another great win in my opinion. But this is where the run really starts to pick up for DDP, and why I personally have him above Merab. So he goes in there against Robert Whittaker, who I will hold my hands up. I thought DDP was going to be made to look like a heavy bag in there against Robert Whittaker. I didn't think DDP stood a chance, and he proved everybody wrong. There was no one that thought DDP was going to beat Robert Whittaker outside of DDP and his team. There is no one that can try and convince me otherwise. Anyone that was talking about this fight was saying that Robert Whittaker was going to beat him, and beat him with ease. And not only did that not happen, DDP was the one who beat Robert Whittaker with ease. Hurt him with a jab in there, which just goes to show the freak power that DDP does have in his hands. He stopped him in the 2nd round. If Sean Strickland didn't beat Adesanya that year, and there's still an argument to be had, that was the biggest upset that year in the UFC. DDP beating Robert Whittaker is one of the biggest upsets. I know it doesn't look like it now with what the guys went on to achieve, but at the time, that was a crazy, crazy upset. And then after that, he then went on to face Sean Strickland, who was coming off the Israel Adesanya win. He was the middleweight champion. Was a close fight, don't get me wrong, but DDP did win it in my opinion, and that's where he captured the title. He beat Sean Strickland, a former champion. Then he went in there against the 2nd greatest UFC middleweight of all time in Israel Adesanya, and he finished him as well. So that his last 3 fights are Israel Adesanya, the 2nd greatest middleweight of all time, former 2-time middleweight champion, Sean Strickland, a former UFC middleweight champion, and Robert Whittaker, top 3 UFC middleweight of all time and a former UFC champion. There's no debate that this guy has to be here, in my opinion. I really don't understand who you would have. Well, I understand who is above him and Merab, but I don't see who you would replace DDP and Merab with to take them out of the top 5, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think Bilal deserves to be above DDP or Merab. I don't think Tom Aspinall does. DDP is definitely in at number 4, but like I said, you could swap him and Merab about. In at number 3, I've got Ilia Topuria. Now look, 1, 2 and 3 they have to be the same in everybody's list, in my opinion. There's no real way to debate it, to be honest. I mean, the order you can maybe debate 3 and 2 anyway, but these three fighters have to be in your top three UFC point for point rankings right now, in my opinion. If not, you're a clown. Ilia Topuria in at number 3. This guy is on an insane run at the minute. I mean, this guy's just knocked out Max Holloway and Volkanovski all in the 1 year, which is just insane. I mean, Max Holloway's a top 3 UFC featherweight of all time, and Volkanovski, in my opinion, is the greatest UFC featherweight of all time, and Topuria has knocked him out back-to-back this year. This is why Ilia Topuria, in my opinion, is the current fighter of the year. I know a lot of people debate, is it Pereira, is it Topuria? For me, with the level of competition Topuria has beaten this year, I have to give it to him. He has to be. Beating Max Holloway and Volkanovski by KO in a singular year is just absolutely insane. Outside of them, two big wins, he's beaten Josh Emmett, who's currently ranked in the featherweight division. Bryce Mitchell, people might not say that's a good win. Bryce Mitchell, I believe, is still ranked inside the top 15. He was ranked when Topuria beat him. And let's not also forget, which a lot of people talk about when they're talking about point for point, Topuria also has a win in the UFC in a different division. This guy now, is it an elite lightweight? No, it's not someone inside the top 15. He hasn't beat anybody inside the top 15 in the lightweight division yet. I do believe Topuria will move up. But he did beat Jai Herbert and he knocked him out, who, yes, might not be an elite lightweight when you think about it, but he moved up a division and beat a guy in the division above him. That has to stand for something, in my opinion. Ilia Topuria, the run he's on at the minute, I mean, I don't know if anybody beats him in the featherweight division, to be honest. I thought Max Holloway would have been the guy. I still do believe that Max Holloway can beat him. But, I mean, he just knocked the guy out, so I maybe need to stop coping. Ilia Topuria, definitely top 3 point for point right now. And in at number 2, we've got Alex Pereira. Like I said, you can maybe swap him and Ilia Topuria about. I do have Topuria as fighter of the year, yes, but let's not forget, Pereira in the space of 3 years has become a 2-division UFC world champion, and he's beaten 5 former UFC world champions in Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya, Jan Blachowicz, Yuri Prohaska, and Jamal Hill. And this year alone, the guy has saved 3 UFC events. He KO'd Jamal Hill at UFC 300. He stepped up to the plate for the biggest card the UFC's ever done when they couldn't get a main event. He saved that card. He then stepped in when Conor McGregor pulled out of his fight against Michael Chandler at UFC 303 to save that event against Yuri Prohaska. Knocked him out in the second round. And then most recently, he saved UFC 307 from having Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena as the main event, which is probably the greatest thing Pereira's ever done, is saving us from that horrendous fight. He stepped in there against Khalil Roundtree on short notice. Well, it was not. He didn't step in. It was kind of a short notice fight for both guys. But he stepped in, saved that card, and knocked out Khalil Roundtree in the 4th round. We have never seen a run like this before in the UFC, and I don't think we will for a very long time. Pereira's run is absolutely insane. The resume this guy's building up in such a short space of time as well. He's number 2, in my opinion. Now, some people like to have him above Islam Makhachev, who, shock, is my point for point number 1. But for me, Islam is clearly, if you just look at skill set versus skill set and compare it through everyone on the UFC's roster, Islam is quite clearly the best, in my opinion. But Alex Pereira is definitely number 2. Like I said, you can't swap him and Topuria out. I just feel like the fact he's a 2-division world champion and the resume the guy's built over such a short space of time, not only beating these people, but the way he's beating them, knocking them out as well, is really, really impressive. And I have Alex Pereira as my number 2 UFC point for point fighter right now. And finally, in a number 1, it's obvious, it is Islam Makhachev. He is clearly the point for point best fighter right now in the UFC. The guy's the current UFC lightweight champion. He's also currently on a 14-fight win streak. I don't know who's going to beat the guy. Definitely no one in the lightweight division. I mean, just look at the run of opponents he's had recently. He beat Dustin Poirier. He beat Volkanovski, who was point for point number 1 at the time, back to back. He then beat Oliveira for the lightweight title. Again, another fighter who was in the point for point top 5, I believe, when Islam Makhachev beat them. Also, other names outside of them. You've got Bobby Green, an okay name, Dan Hooker, who is currently ranked inside the top 6 of the UFC lightweight division. Islam Makhachev does have a stacked resume. He's also beat Arman Tsarukyan, again, another guy who, let's not forget, Arman has just beaten Charles Oliveira. He's currently the number one contender now in the lightweight division. Islam is going to rematch him next, but he has already beat him. I think Islam Makhachev is clearly the pound for pound number one. I don't know who's going to shift him from that spot. I don't think it's Pereira. The only one I can maybe think of is Ilia Topuria if he keeps on this run. Say Ilia moves up. I don't know. I mean, I genuinely don't know, because I don't think even if Ilia moves up, he doesn't beat Islam. So I really don't see how anybody takes Islam off the pound for pound number one spot unless he retires. But yeah, those are my current top 5 UFC pound for pound rankings. Let me know yours in the comments below. And as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And I'll see you again in the next one.